Good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about some of the work that we are doing within the Playful and Gameful research that we are doing at Coventry University, and as well as with the various partners that we have in Europe and internationally, like in Malaysia. And I can see two of my project partners are actually here today as well. Fitri and Jesse are here. Just to give you a bit of a context in terms of the work that we are doing, we are actually a lab which has been set up at the university in 2014. And the aim is to actually work with staff and students across the university in discovering different ways for teaching and learning. How can we encourage them to innovate the way they engage with each other, with their course, their content, as well as to apply them in real world situations. So the lab was set up to really work with them in trying to figure out how can we change the way we deliver content, the way we actually create intentional and purposeful teaching and learning within the university. But the work that we are doing has been recognized by the different organizations in the UK, in Europe, as well as internationally. So that has really, how do you call it, expand the work that we're doing beyond what the university has intended us to do in the beginning. I'm going to show you a short video of the achievements that we had at the lab between 2014 and 2017. It's quite an old video, but at least that will give you a bit of context on the sort of work that we are doing at the lab.
The journey the lab has gone on has been, I think, really kind of fascinating. And if I try and summarize it, I guess, into three words, would be the idea of kind of serendipitous sort of engagement. I think the other word perhaps would be collaborative. I guess the third one would be action.
This is a space, and I've seen it over the last day and a half, 2 days. This is a space where people are being asked to think about that. The disruption is a disruption of a model of thinking, of a culture of acceptance.
The DMLL's role is a safe space for staff to come perhaps use our spaces to experiment with their students, to explore new ideas, which perhaps realise what the 21st century university could be.
So one of the key strands of work that we are looking at is very much around playful learning and game-based learning, and how can we take inspirations from games and play in so many different forms, like serious games, game-based learning, applied games, gamification, or whatever you want to call it. And essentially, we want to find out and investigate how can we take inspirations from games, game components, and the action of gameplay, and how can we use that to inform the design of teaching and learning that will make it more inclusive, as well as meaningful for those who are actually learning at university and beyond. And we very much work with colleagues as well as partners in different projects who are basically across the spectrum of readiness, whether they are ready to change, or they are enthusiastic about new methodology, technology, and whatnot. So we are working with people who are not familiar with all sorts of different techniques that we are testing out at the lab. So there have been a lot of challenges in encouraging people to really rethink and reimagine the way they teach and learn. But it has been an interesting process, and we've done a lot of different work within the different projects that we have, which are funded by the university, which are non-funded, as well as funded by the different funding bodies in Europe, in the UK, as well as internationally, as you can see through HEFKI, through Newton Fund, Erasmus+, ESRC, Horizon 2020, Arts and Humanities, Research Council, so on and so forth. So these projects collectively are informing us in terms of how can we reimagine the way we teach and learn, and how can we make it more empathic and inclusive and encouraging people to co-create with us, which is important because the sense of ownership is important in, in encouraging people to innovate the way they teach and the way they learn. So it is all about designing an experience that is going to be empowering. It's quite hard because the study of motivation is huge. So it's hard to get it right, but we have to start somewhere, and we have to really understand the people whom we are working with, whether they are educators or whether they are learners themselves, as well as a community around them. How can we create this empowering experience? So from the work we are doing, we are very much interested in understanding play, and play from the point of view of gameplay as well, which is interesting because how can we replicate the emotions that we get when we play games, the amount of investments that we will put in when we play games, the social interaction that we have with those we are playing with, and how can we replicate this and perhaps learn from them and create an experience that is going to be useful and empowering and meaningful. And even though games is not a total representation of play, but it is the best, or perhaps the best way that we can actually use to measure how play can influence the way we conduct purposeful and meaningful activities through encouraging the sense of autonomy, the social interactions, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of work within the magic circle, quote unquote, which is being done in game-based learning, in trying to understand the different types of rules and mechanics, and how can we still encourage free play, the freedom in play within this magic circle. So this is the things that we are working with, working on when we are engaging with the different stakeholders, from primary to secondary school, further education, higher education, as well as in professional development. How can we encourage people to create experiences that is going to be empowering? So through our interest in terms of remixing play and how can we learn from gameplay, we set up a program which is called Game Changers, which is very much looking around co-creativity, encouraging people who are not really familiar with games, as well as playful learning, game-based learning, in trying to onboard them to understand more about the different aspects that can be relevant and meaningful for their own practices. Because when we first set up the lab, we received a lot of requests from colleagues across the university asking us if we can create a game for them to teach certain subjects, but we said, no, that's not how we work. We need to co-create. We need to get you to understand the process itself, so that through the process, you would feel that you own the process itself, because it's not our methods, it's not our tool that is going to be used in their teaching and learning, but it's their own tool that they can create and co-create with one another, as well as with the students. And this program has recently won the Gamification for Education and Learning Award in 2019. And it's, I'm quite chuffed for this particular win, because we have worked so hard in working with different stakeholders in UK and across the world. So it is very much around co-creation. How can we encourage those who are not within the game-based research or practice or development to be able to understand that there is a process that they can actually follow, and there is a process that they can actually adapt in order for them to be part of the process of the creation of game-based learning resources, which is important, I believe, because there is a huge value in making games and creating games especially when you are creating something that is going to address the needs that you have identified. So you are creating something meaningful together. So this is something that we are very much interested in. And this is also aligning with UNESCO in encouraging, teachers, for example, to be empowered and upskilled. And this is one of the key instruments that will address the targets of SDG 4, which is for equitable and quality education all over the world. So this is something that we are very much interested in. But usually it's like we are asked questions. It's like, how can we do this? How can we make it perfect? How can we create the best game? You can't. There is no such thing as a formula for game-based learning. There is no special recipe that can actually help you to create something that is effective, perhaps. But there are existing studies that can serve as benchmarks that can give us inspirations of how certain types of games would work in different types of scenarios, even though there are no standards and formula. So one of the key research which are being done at the moment is very much around understanding what make a game effective in engagement as well as in enhancing learning. What are the specific game mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics that collectively will actually create this experience that is going to enhance someone's learning. So this is something that we are very much interested in. So one thing that we are looking at is very much around a holistic and pragmatic approach in getting people to understand about the gaps and the needs that they have within a practice. For example, it can be, a lesson plan. What is the actual lesson plan that we are interested in? What are the theories behind that? What are the things that we want to teach? What are the measures that is going to help us to identify whether the learning has been achieved? And what is the actual dynamic in terms of the activities that we think could actually enhance this experience? How can we make it gameful? What are the components of gameplay and playful learning that we can actually include as part of it? And the last layer is very much around what types of technology that will enable this to happen. It can be analog, it can be digital, it can be a hybrid. So these are the sort of like thought process that we are encouraging our stakeholders to work on in trying to understand that it is actually about the needs and the opportunities and experiences that we want to create instead of the actual technology that we want to create for supporting this. So this is just an example of one of the projects that the students as well as the lecturers, they partnered on a project where they created a game for supporting language learning. So they went through all the process, and towards the end, they managed to get a partnership with the MIT in the US, and they managed to create a game which is now being used in Coventry. So you can go into Coventry and you can learn the language as well as the history as well as the culture at the same time. So this is quite an interesting project where we can see that students can actually work with lecturers and they can actually create something that can use within the classroom setting. So we didn't create it, they did. And we also go through something which is more rigorous in terms of understanding the value of transdisciplinarity in terms of the creation of game-based learning. What are the different inspirations that we can get from different disciplines? For example, in health, they are using intervention mapping approach, which would make an intervention more rigorous. So can we actually learn from that and then include it as part of our resources? And one of the key work that I'm doing with some of my colleagues in other universities is very much around the mapping between the pedagogical constructs against the game constructs. Collectively, the mechanics can create certain experiences that will enhance certain types of learning. So this is an ongoing research we are doing at the moment, which is going to inform how we can create a game-based learning experience that will be more meaningful. And again, when we talk to teachers, especially those who are not familiar with game-based research, so on and so forth, it's like simplify it. It's like, what do you mean? It is important for every single thing that we do, especially in playful learning, in game-based learning, we need to understand that we need to provide a way to onboard our educators in game-based learning? How can we encourage them to be game designers, regardless of what quality the games would be? But we need to onboard them in the process, onboard them in a practice that will actually enhance their competency in this particular area, towards developing new resources that they can actually use in the future. So it is very much around the design thinking approach that we looked at. So we're trying to onboard them, get them to practice creating new resources, and then master it, meaning that they will be able to implement it within a classroom setting. They can evaluate it, they can see what works, what would not work, and that can inform future practice that they have, which is something interesting. One of the examples of the onboarding approach that we use is quite a simple process. It is about trying to encourage them to think as simple as possible. For example, on the screen, a great idea can stem from something that already exists. So how can we actually take this principle and implement it in a simpler way? For example, if you have a game inspiration, for example, in this case is Scrabble, the topic or the challenge or the opportunities that you have is to perhaps teach operation, in particular equation, perhaps. So can we remix and reuse and remod this particular game and turn it into something totally different? So you might use the same mechanics and you can actually create a Scrabble game that would teach people how to actually do equations. So these are the things that we normally use as part of the onboarding stage, especially to get people to think about this particular process. And it is quite interesting. The first time I run this particular approach in a workshop, it's like someone where I gave them 1 minute, they managed to create it in half a minute. And then the next time, someone actually came up with an idea in about 2 to 3 seconds. So it's quite amazing to see someone can actually quickly think of a game idea, no matter whether they are perfect or not. But it is to give them, it's like a brain worm. Each time they think of a problem, they will think of a game that can actually solve it. So this is what we are trying to achieve in the onboarding to get them into the practice. So some of the examples of games which have been remixed. For example, here is a stopwatch game which has been remixed into a science game where they can actually learn a lot of different topics in science, and they can do it in teams, and so they enjoy it as a social, the social aspect of it as well, encourage them to really work with one another to answer those questions when they are playing this, which is quite interesting. Another example is a game which is inspired by story dice, card games, and experience design. This is to encourage students to be to learn about empathy, to learn about everyone comes from different background. So whatever visual images that you see will actually be interpreted by different people differently, because we all have different background, we all have different experiences. So whatever that we are seeing will perhaps trigger different types of memories, perhaps, or different types of things that we have read before in the past. So that define how we interpret different things. So this is to encourage students to really respect one another in terms of the different ideas that they would share within a group setting, which I find quite interesting. So this game has been used in the US, they've been used in France, for example, because we provided this for free, so they downloaded it and someone spent the whole Sunday cutting up cards. So in the end, we decided to create an online version, so you can see the link on the screen. So there's an online version that will be able to randomize those cards, so you can actually use it within your classroom as well. And this is something which has been done by the students in one of our colleges, and they are working with people from the homeless charity as well as some of the schools. So they came up with this idea of using Monopoly as the mechanic of the game to encourage people to really talk about the issues that homeless people would actually face. And the homeless people themselves were involved as the stakeholders here in trying to understand how we can actually provide a game that would be more empathic to the sort of challenges they are facing. And this is actually doing very well, which have won like a joint winner award for a game in one of the conferences in Europe. And another example, just to show you the variety of things that can be done with this particular context, an escape room, where a few escape rooms have been created to encourage different subjects to be represented in different ways in a hybrid approach, digital and physical. So this is something that is quite interesting to see how lecturers can actually create this themselves as well. So the approach that we have has been recognized by different organizations in different parts of the world. And through the existing work within game changers and methods that we have done, the research and the practice, with our previous partnership with British Council, as well as a university in Malaysia, as well as looking at the trend in the research in game-based learning, games for change, in trying to understand how can we use games to address sustainability development goals of the United Nations. So this is something that we worked on, and we managed to get funding from the Arts and Humanities Research Council under the Newton Fund. So we are working with our Malaysian partner to adapt game changers in Malaysia. So through this project, we have created a community where the teachers actually share their game ideas. So as you can see on the screen, some of the game ideas are there. I think so far we have about over 20 different games which have been created by the teachers themselves, where they implemented them in a classroom. And they have also collaborated with us to create a blueprint for other teachers to actually use, as well as the play cards as well, to inform and to guide other teachers on how they can actually design games for the classroom. And not only the community, as well as the different types of resources that everyone is creating, space is important as well when we think about encouraging people to be a game designer in terms of designing games for the classroom, is to give them a space that is going to inspire them, which I think is important in terms of the research around game-based learning. We need to think about the space, the physical space as well. So what we've learned from this is all about trying to encourage relatedness, the autonomy towards mastery, as well as identifying the purpose of what resources we are creating within a classroom setting. So the sense of ownership is key. The onboarding part is very important for us to encourage people to understand the value of different methods that they can actually use for reimagining the way they teach and learn, and using game-based learning, using the different methods that we share with them in terms of the use of the remixing play flashcards, the use of game design thinking, and encouraging them to structure the way they create those games, and to also implement it within a classroom setting that will provide real-life experience for our educators, as well as anyone who is interested in creating and designing games. The localization of the process is important as well. Game Changers has been adapted to address the needs of the local parties in Malaysia. And through this finding and through these experiences that we managed to gain from this particular project, the approach is now being adapted to address the issues of social resilience, which is key in terms of what we are experiencing now, especially in terms of the pandemic. How can we develop resilience through play? So we are working with 3 partners in 3 different countries, in Vietnam, in Malaysia, as well as in Indonesia. And we are still in the process of identifying the key needs, as well as the key focus through which game-based methodology can actually enable certain activities that are going to do within their community. So this is something that I would love to talk about in the future once we've actually done the field work. And our research has also informed the teaching at university, where the play and game design thinking is part of the elective course that the students can actually take. So they can actually learn about how to actually take inspiration from play and games, and they can design new product, they can design new solutions that will address real problems. And we have done a lot of research around this, and the students whom we have engaged with, they identify that empathy is one of the key things that is going to make a lot of difference in whatever they are doing, regardless of what discipline they are. So this is something that we think we have achieved within this particular process, because we believe in the power of empathy in encouraging us to create better solutions, whatever solutions they are, to address whatever challenges and opportunities in the real world. So this is something that is key. And the work we are doing within the game design methodology and practice has also informed how we want to actually work with teachers in Europe. So through the funding we managed to get for the Beginning project, I'm not sure whether you have heard of this project before, but there were 15 partners across Europe, and it was completed last year, and recently won the Gamification Award for Software 2019. And it is around addressing the trends which are still valid now in terms of the research around pervasive gaming, especially in terms of the use of Pokemon Go and the use of all sorts of different alternate reality gaming type thing that is going to break the barriers of space and time in teaching and learning. So this has informed how we can actually encourage educators to be able to create this. So the same principles that we learn and that we develop through Game Changers and some of the other projects that we have, the principle is pretty much the same in trying to encourage anyone to easily alter gamified experiences, whether they are going to be used on a desktop or whether they are going to be used in a location-based approach, in a more pervasive approach. Because I believe that games are getting more pervasive, not only technologically, but also culturally, as well as in terms of the social connection that we have with people who we are playing with, whether they are our own group of friends, whether they are strangers on the street, where we are playing Pokemon Go, doing raiding and things like that. So this is something that I believe education should look into, in terms of encouraging us to blend the formal and informal learning, so games can provide that. So this prototype has been piloted in 10 different countries in Europe, as well as in countries which are not in Europe, for example, South Africa, Turkey, and Israel. We have engaged with 6,000 teachers and students, and 87% find it highly engaging in the process. 84% of them found that they've improved learning. But we are still learning a lot more in terms of what part of the actual game that the teachers created actually provide the engagement as well as improvement in terms of learning itself. So we have also done a bit of the pilot in Singapore as well as in different parts of the, in different sectors, for example, in cultural engagement and things like that. So it is very much around power to the people, getting people to have the tool that they can actually change what they are practicing. So it's all about, games can drive collective action in the real world. How can we look into this? There are a lot of different work which have been done in this particular area. One of the things that we are working on is very much around trying to see, can we create games based on data that is being collected by the citizens? So it's very much around citizen science, crowdsourcing, so on and so forth. So this example is very much around trying to get the general public to collect data on the road quality in where they are, which will inform strategy for the city councils and so forth. So in order for in order for them to play the actual game that is part of this particular app, they will need to collect data, and the data is being processed and then being used to create new levels and new terrain that they can actually use in this particular game. You can have a look at the URL and then have a play. But this is something that we are very much interested in, aligning with some of the work that is being done by others. For example, Foldit, as you know, that is all about protein folding. They are also doing a bit of work to help scientists to find the vaccine for COVID-19 as well. So they are using this type of approach and using gameplay to encourage people to be involved in finding solutions to real world problems. So this is one of the key trends at the moment. As you know, IoT, extended reality, artificial intelligence, everyone is talking about this, about the value of technology. So these are the things that many of my colleagues, as well as those who are actually in game-based research, are researching and trying to understand how they can actually supersize the game experiences, whether for entertainment or for serious purposes, which I find interesting. And esports, one of the key things in education, there are a lot of different guidelines now for schools to create their own esports community, especially in terms of the spectatorship through Twitch as well as through Facebook Live, in terms of people are actually learning about strategies and skills through watching another person playing games. I find it quite interesting. So this is something that is quite a trend in research at the moment as well. But everything has to be informed by what experiences that we want to create, because sometimes we are very much influenced by new technologies, new shiny things, and we tend to forget that we need to understand what are the actual needs of the audience that we are trying to engage. So the experience you want to create will inform the different types of activities and the different types of technologies that could actually enhance the experience that we want to create as well, whether it's using IoT with virtual reality perhaps, or the use of a hybrid approach of a board game with some augmented reality functionality perhaps. But it has to be informed by the needs, and it has to be informed by the experience we want to create. So this is something that I would strongly advise anyone who is thinking about designing games for serious purposes. They need to think about the experience and the actual value of what they want to create, rather than trying to create something that is all shiny but it's not fit for purpose. But of course, we need to be inspired by technology. I'm inspired by technology, but these are the things that I think we should think about when we create new solutions. So looking at the different, new technologies which are coming up, especially in the era of Industry 4.0, as well as looking at the work that we are doing in terms of encouraging people to be game designers, encouraging people to really have to achieve the sense of ownership in the process, the designing of games, the designing of game experiences to achieve serious purposes. We would need to encourage our stakeholders, our teachers, our educators, for example, if it's for health, our health practitioners to be involved in the creation, because this would help them to understand the complexity of the process itself, the value in understanding how to engage different types of audiences. This is something that all of us should learn from, and we are still learning. And so this is something that we wish to pursue more in the future, especially through the project, the one that I've just mentioned, the one in Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia, and we are working with UNESCO. We have contacted a few of them and see how we can actually work with the different departments and see how play and games can be part of their policy as well, in terms of encouraging young people to be more resilient, so on and so forth. So just to end, I've got about 6 minutes before the 40 minutes is up. We need to think about how hybrid learning spaces or hybrid spaces can inform the way we implement game-based solutions, and that will include experiences as well as the the audiences that we are working with as well. So this is a shameless plug. My book just where it's out now. It's very much around talking about intentional and purposeful teaching and learning. How can we take inspirations from play and game-based research that can help us to inform the development and the design of the experiences within these hybrid spaces. So it's not about the binary of offline and online. It is all about designing experiences at the speed of need. So this could be something that the game industry could actually learn from as well, in terms of creating experiences that will be that can actually enhance the interaction between you and your console, perhaps, and that can involve some physical activities or some learning activities that can be done outside of the game magic circle. So thank you very much, and hopefully it has been useful. I'm trying to go through so many different things, and hopefully that I didn't actually talk too speedily. Thank you very much.
Massive thank you, Sylvester, for that talk. It's absolutely insightful. And again, massive thank you as well for the time that you have provided to actually do this talk. We have had a couple of questions come in from various people in this talk. So if you don't mind, we do have something like about 6 questions to go through, if that's okay with you.
That is fine, that is great.
So for the first question, we were asking if you could expand a little bit on the impact you have seen of using games in learning, especially if there's any way, if you like, you can actually quantify that and pinpoint that impact in learning.
I could perhaps use example of working with the various schools in 10 different countries through the beginning project, because the empathic approach that we have started from the beginning. So in terms of the design of the actual the authoring tool, as well as the gamified lessons with the teachers. So what we found is that the teachers need to be supported in terms of the onboarding of class. Level of readiness is key. So what we've found is through the experience, the impact that we have is not so much around the learning outcomes, because the learning outcomes would come after the implementation of how the teachers could actually map it against the curriculum, is the actual change in practice of the teachers whom we have worked with in these 10 different countries, from those who were not familiar with game-based learning to now practicing it, because they find that they are empowered in creating their own resources. So if I quantify that in terms of the research we've done with them, I think around about 85% of the teachers say that game-based learning is something that they will practice beyond the actual engagement that we have with them, and we are still actually working with them now, especially in terms of requests of having more access to the functionalities of the platform itself. And I could also link it with the project in Malaysia in terms of working with teachers in rural part of Malaysia, where game-based learning was perhaps not as popular, because it is quite sort of like a Western principle in terms of using games for learning. But in the short time that we spent with the teachers in one of the schools, they managed to create their own game resources in 2 hours. And when they implemented it in the class with the students, they were surprised to see the impact of those particular games in terms of how they have engaged students who are not normally engaged in a classroom. So that is an impact from the feedback from the principal as well as the teachers who were involved. But in terms of the learning outcomes, there are so many different studies. For example, the one that we did with Prepare, one of the games we created about 6-7 years ago, and some of the other games that we are creating now, the learning outcomes have been achieved in terms of the differences between those who are actually using games as part of the learning and those who are not. So in terms of the randomized control trials, so those are the things provide evidence on the effectiveness of the use of games for learning, really.
Thank you. That just also extends onto another question as well. So because of time as well, I'll skip onto the question of, you did mention the use of analog and digital games. So could you just quickly touch on the benefits of both in this context?
Right. So the benefit, if I just go back to one of the slides, which would be quite interesting, in terms of the holistic approach, because the way that we are looking at the use of games is very much, oh, it's going to work. Right, let me just go to the slide. Right, so yeah. So the type of games, whether it's analog or digital, as I said before, it all depends on the actual needs and as well as the experience that we want to create. And from our experience, both analog and digital are effective, as effective. However, the analog games that we have created as well as tested out, they provide more social interaction in terms of the engagement you have with other players that will add another layer of self-reflection and group reflection. And based on our research, debriefing should be part of a game-based learning intervention, because it is important for students to reflect on the experience, which will enhance the understanding of the process. For digital game-based learning, because most of the time digital game-based learning are very much played individually. So I would also advise some of the teachers that we are working with to really include debriefing as part of it, meaning that the students can actually play the game separately if they want to, or play in teams, but they will come back in the classroom and they will discuss about what they've learned and discuss about the experience as well as questions. Sometimes you can create confusion through game scenarios, something that is incidental. So in game design, I think we should provide space for exploring the incidentals or the emerging learning. I think in game design, we call it the Easter eggs and whatnot. So it's something that perhaps was not intentional or something that is intentionally designed for students to discover. So it all depends on the design of the digital game that will provide more value in terms of the meaning and the purpose when they come together as a group and discuss about their experiences. But yeah, so I think both are effective, but you have to use it in different ways. You have to really put it as part of a program of intervention rather than to be used individually, separately.
Excellent, thank you. Another question, this isn't from me, but it may as well be, that says, I want a learning lab of my own. And which is, if you like, what is the best way to persuade managers and funders on investing in something like this? And how did you get over the chasm, if you like, or get over those challenges of materializing such a learning lab?
It's quite interesting. If the history is quite long, but what I can say is there are two key units that were doing fantastic job at the university in terms of trying to reimagine the way we conduct education, if I can put it that way. One is the Serious Games Institute, which I was a part of. And the name, speaks for itself in terms of research around serious games, the effectiveness, the design behind it, and whatnot. And the other one was the Arts and Design the School of Arts and Design. So they are doing a lot of work in terms of open education. How can we use the arts and humanities in encouraging learning, cross-disciplinary, so on and so forth. So the university was very much interested in bringing these two together. So at the beginning of the setup of the lab, myself and 3 others were put together to really set up what the lab was meant to do in terms of what are different things that we wish to investigate. And I must say, it was the university was very much invested from the beginning. So our vice chancellor was the previous vice chancellor was the one who started the whole thing by looking at what we have achieved in these 2 different units at university. So I think what I can say, my advice is the evidence. Just disrupt the different types of practices that you might have at university, and then provide evidence that the new reimagining of teaching and learning can actually enhance different types of experiences, and this evidence can be used to actually convince the university in terms of the different types of support that they should give to educators across the university. So I think that is how it should be done. But what I can say is it's not an easy ride, because the first year of the operation of the lab, it was quite difficult to get people on board because the name itself, disruptive. So it was quite disruptive in terms of trying to not, how do you call it? How do you put a balance between changing how the university is being run in terms of teaching and learning, but also adhering to the regulations and whatnot. So there's an interesting process that we went through, and I would love to share some of the experiences perhaps in other discussions, because it is another topic in itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair enough. Thank you. So another question, and then we should be over to the last one. This one is about ethical considerations. So you mentioned in this presentation about using games to source data, and I've seen as well from personal experience that it's actually quite an effective tool. However, what are the ethical considerations, especially if the data that we're sourcing is sensitive data?
Yes, from the beginning, in terms of the creation of games itself, especially one of the methods that we're using, especially in this method here, the Transdisciplinarity, we try to understand the best way to start with. I would call game-based learning as an intervention, because we are intervening the process that a human being will go through, and that might change their attitude or nurture certain behaviors and so forth. So I would call it an intervention. So we try to learn from the health research, because as you know, in medical sciences, in healthcare, they are more rigorous in terms of the ethics and the sort of process that they have to go through. So we followed through an intervention mapping approach that will encourage the mapping of the different types of changes that you would like to see in behaviors, the different types of improvement in learning, or different types of benefits that you would wish to achieve through that intervention in the beginning of the process of the design of the games itself. So we work with different stakeholders, different subject experts, in trying to understand, okay, in terms of the data that we need to collect, what are the measures, what are the KPIs, what are the things that we need to track that will inform better support for the students, perhaps. For example, if a student will go through a game and the educator would get some sort of like a summary of the progress that will inform his or her intervention in a classroom setting to help those students who are struggling in their learning. So we applied for the ethics from the beginning, and it would go through probably 2, 3, 4 different iterations before it has been approved, because everything to do with that, the types of data that you collect, how is it going to be anonymized in terms of the unlinked, where is the server going to be held. So those are the things that need to be thought through. So that will actually inform not only the design itself, but the technological aspect of it, which is quite troublesome, especially for those who are thinking of using a game which has been created by other companies. You have to think of, I think the due diligence is important. Need to find out where the server is based, go through the due diligence process to ensure that whatever instruments that you are using will have the regulations and the standard that is relevant to the UK, and as well as, because we are still in the EU now, so in terms of GDPR and whatnot.
Yeah.
So those are the things that need to be included in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one last question, this one is from me. You briefly touched on the Internet of Things as part of essentially game-based learning and in serious games as a wider context as well. So as we sort of briefly spoke about before, combining the Internet of Things with serious games is very much my research domain. It's what my research focuses on. But in your expert opinion, do you feel that combination, that absolute merger of creating a single experience by combining these pervasive senses into the game and making the game more adaptive, does that have the power to change and become a pivotal force for the future of serious games and gamification?
Absolutely. I strongly believe that the more we understand how we can exploit IoT in supersizing the gameful experience that we want to create, I think the better system or better solution or the experience that we are going to create in the future. And it all depends on, as you know, going back to your previous question in terms of the ethical aspect of it, in terms of the data that is going to be used to trigger or influence different types of action. For example, if you use Forbes theory in terms of trigger the motivation and the competencies, what types of trigger are we going to create through the combination of different sensors, perhaps, or you know, the different networked devices that we have in a school setting, at home, or outdoors, and so forth. So in terms of health and safety, those are the things, the different research are actually coming up in terms of looking at the health and safety of using IoT in game-based learning, as well as cultural aspect as well. In different schools, the policies are different. The different cultural aspect in terms of the readiness level of being tracked is different. It might be relevant in places, for example, in South Korea and in Vietnam. Perhaps it's not as easily acceptable in UK, perhaps, in terms of being tracked. You know, there is an assertion that I made, so don't quote me. So it's, I think those are the things that need to be thought through in terms of the design, the different types of data that we need to collect. What are those data going to be used to trigger? What types of activities? What types of action? What types of information? But I think there's a huge benefit in using IoT in game-based learning.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think that just about concludes all the questions. So I'm sure everyone else will join me as well in absolutely thanking you for this seminar. It's been very insightful, as I mentioned. Thank you again for giving us the time of your day to present. I also want to extend my thanks to, of course, the people that helped me organise this and co-organise this, which is the Manchester Game Studies Network. Shout out to Sam Illingsworth and Paul Wake as well. And of course, Moy Hoon Yap, who helped organise this from a humour-centred computing sense as well for CFAX, which is our research centre at MMU. That's about it, basically. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I hope you all found it insightful. I'm sure I did. And from the responses in the chat, I can see everybody did as well. So thank you and stay safe.